This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So, spiritual community. So Buddha did often talk about the importance of spiritual community in many, many different ways. And what I'm going to look at tonight is just 3 verses from the Dhammapada, where the Buddha doesn't quite talk about spiritual community, but by digging into it, we'll find out what his vision for spiritual community was. At the end of his life, he talked to his disciples about conditions for the stability of the spiritual community. On other occasions, he exhorted them to really look after each other, to look out for each other, as if they were family. And early on, after the first 60 disciples or so, he asked them to go out and spread the Dharma, to pass on to others what they had learned, which was, of course, the spiritual community grew by people passing on what they'd learned. So his vision for a spiritual community, you could say, consists of 3 things. Yeah. Firstly, it's a vision of people who are working on themselves to become more ethically skillful, to transform themselves, to become more aware, more compassionate, more alive in a way. So that's the first thing. The next thing is people who are willing to take what they've learned and give it to others, to share what they've learned, to share what they've gained from the teachings. And the third thing is supporting people who will support and help each other on the path. So there's 3 elements to spiritual community in ways. It's that element of taking responsibility for our own states of mind and transforming ourselves, working on ourselves, and doing that in relation to others in order to be mutually supportive and being willing to share what we gain from all of that. So you could say the spiritual community is it's a condition for spiritual practice in order to be able to practice, and it's also a spiritual practice in itself. It's a spiritual practice in itself in the sense that we give it to others. It's a practice of giving, of generosity. So in the Dhammapada, this vision is it's given in a very condensed form, you could say, in these verses that I'm looking at. So I'll just tell you what the 3 verses are. For those of you who like to know these things, they come from the chapter on happiness, the Sukhavagga, and they're verses 197, 198, and 199. And they go like this: Happy indeed we live, friendly amid the haters. Among those who hate, we dwell free from hate. Happy indeed we live, healthy amid the sick. Among those who are sick, we dwell free from sickness. Happy indeed we live, content amid the greedy. Among those who are greedy, we dwell free from greed. So I'm going to look at those 3 verses in more depth and try and draw out the relevance to us as a spiritual community. So all of these 3 verses speak about being happy, and being happy in the midst of those who are greedy, sick, or given to hatred. So the ideal, as it were, being put forward there is not about complete withdrawal from the world, but being in the world, but unstained by it, unsullied by it. Yeah. So it's the ideal of being in the world, but not worldly. Yeah. So it's an ideal of remaining in positive, skillful states of mind, even when we're surrounded by those who are predominantly negative and unskillful. Yeah. I say even when, but that's all the time. And the reason for being in the world in this way is to spread the truth of the Dharma out of compassion for the suffering caused by spiritual ignorance. Yeah? So you could say the primary way of teaching the Dharma is by living it. Yeah? And by living it, we spread it. This is what later came to be known as the Bodhisattva ideal. So that's the first thing to note about the spiritual community. To be an effective spiritual community, it's in the midst of the world and working for the welfare of everybody. That's a key part in the spiritual community. So right from the start, it's emphasizing unselfishness, the opposite to egotism, basically. Which doesn't, of course, mean that everybody must be in the world all the time. Of course, we have to withdraw into retreat or whatever from time to time. It's only by doing that that we're able to attain to any kind of state of being happy among those who are negative and unskillful. So we need to withdraw into retreat quite frequently, I would say, in order to be to attain to that kind of positivity, which then has an effect on others. So each of these three verses begins with the phrase, happy indeed we live. Yeah? Happy indeed we live. And the word for happy here is su sukham. So sukha is the word for happy, sukha. You may have come across it if you've heard the mantra, sabe satta sukhi hontu. Sabe, everybody, all. May all beings be happy. And then you've got the prefix su, so su sukha. And the su is an emphatic. It emphasizes, it raises it up to another level, as it were. It's very happy, or supremely happy, or extremely happy, or happy indeed, as it's translated here. So it intensifies the word happy. So the idea is that susukha is not just ordinary happiness. It's not a good mood, as it were. It's a deep happiness. Yeah, it's an intense happiness, and given this context, it's an unshakable happiness. Yeah, it's a kind of equanimity, really. So this is a very high ideal to attain to this kind of happiness, and not only individually but collectively, where you're content and happy and so on. It's like a kind of river running through the individuals and the community. So it's not a happiness that's fleeting or ephemeral. So it's this, as I say, it's this kind of deep river of positivity flowing right through our whole being continuously. So for most of us, this is something yet to be achieved, I would imagine. Yeah? This is what we're aiming at. But that doesn't mean that the verses have no relevance for us. The verses give us a sense of the direction we're going in. We're aiming for this kind of deep, integrated happiness, su-sukha, which enables us to become an effective spiritual community. Enables us to become a community that can actually be effective in the world, be effective in easing the suffering of the world, and also deepening our own wisdom or insights. So then the verses talk about what that looks like in practice, what it looks like in practice. Friendly amid the haters, healthy amid the sick, and content amid the greedy. So this gives us an idea of how to practice, how to achieve that state of happiness. When we're happy in this sense, then we will be friendly amid the haters, healthy amid the sick, content amid the greedy. So in order to get to that state of happiness, this is what we have to practice. So I'll go into this a bit. It's the same principle for like practicing the precepts, that the precepts express in principle what the awakened mind is like, how it behaves in the world, and then we practice in order to move towards that. So here we're going to be practicing friendliness, contentment, and we'll go into what healthy means as well in this context. So how do we practice being friendly amid the haters? So you could say there are various elements to friendliness, various levels, you could say, of friendliness. Some very straightforward and simple. For instance, friendliness includes hospitality, just basic hospitality. It also includes being interested in other people, in listening to them. And, of course, being a friend, in the sense of befriending others. And, beyond that, it also includes metta, which we've just been doing, which expands out beyond even friends and even to enemies, and beyond and beyond and beyond. And it includes karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy. And as with the Metta Bhavana, we can practice friendliness, of course, towards ourselves, towards friends, families, work colleagues, the local community, the rest of the city, the rest of the country, the rest of the world, even other forms of life and so on. So this first level, hospitality, well, for us as Sangha members, you could say, it involves simple things like making new people feel welcome. People who come centre to centre, just making them feel welcome here in the Buddhist Centre. I think probably Dublin Buddhist Centre is very good at that. I hope. So whether it's a visiting order member, or a mitra who's new to the centre, or someone who's come in out of curiosity, or booked in a course, or just being hospitable, welcoming. I think many people who come to Buddhist centres, I think somebody's worked this out, that a lot of us are introverts and therefore shy and reserved. So when we first come along, we need a bit of encouragement. And so many of us will have a tendency to sit quietly in the background. And then when we do get more involved, and we have our own set of friends that we like to see and spend time with and chat with. But this being hospitable means that we have to go out of our comfort zones a bit and try to be aware of others and friendly and welcoming to those who are new and maybe don't feel so comfortable in this environment. So, yes, what we want to do is we want to start, if you're going to be friendly amid the haters, we want to start by being friendly amid the friendly. Because, it's actually something we have to do. That's the point, isn't it? We have to be friendly, even with those who are not haters, and we just have to be friendly amid the friendly. And in the first instance, that's just being hospitable, welcoming, open to people. And then, of course, it means being interested in others and listening to others. Actually, often people do say, when they come to Buddhist centres, often people say one of the first things that struck them is that people listened to them, that they were listened to for the first time. They felt that somebody listened to them. That's quite an important thing that maybe we might take for granted sometimes. It's really important because what it means is that you're giving somebody this gift of awareness. You're aware of them, and you're aware of them at quite a deep level. And we might take that for granted sometimes, that we've been meditating for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. We may take for granted the level of awareness that we've developed. But to someone who's new to it, that may be quite a striking feature of what we're given to them. And of course, in the Sangha, we will have some friendships that are more intimate, where we share ourselves more fully. And that's important for our spiritual and also our psychological welfare, you could say, that we have good friends. Yeah? But of course, the only way to have good friends, close friends, intimate friends, as it were, is by befriending people. Yeah, it's active. It's something we do rather than something that happens to us. Yeah. So to work on this ideal of being friendly amid the haters, we need to make an effort to be friendly in whatever situation we find ourselves. It's interesting, maybe some of the situations are the ones that are closest to us, like the family. Try to be friendly with our family. We can try to be friendly with our work colleagues. And these are two arenas, you could say, that can often bring out the worst in us. Yeah. Oh, nodding heads all around. And sometimes we have to make a really special effort to maintain awareness of our aspirations and so on in those contexts, to be happy and friendly in the midst of the world as well, because that's where we meet the world, is in those situations. Yeah. Of course, these situations sometimes they're difficult because people have roles, like in family. People have roles. There's husband, wife, mother, daughter, son, brother, sister. All those different kind of roles can get in the way. Can be a hindrance to just being a human being in relation to another human being. So we have to make an effort. We have to make an effort to see our mother as a person, to see our son as a person, our sister, or whatever it is. We have to sometimes make an effort to see them as another person with a whole set of needs and desires and so on that we may not even be aware of. Yeah. So that's the sort of effort in awareness and friendliness that leads us in the direction of this ideal of being friendly with the haters as well. And then friendliness in relation to the wider community, I guess it's a matter of taking an interest and supporting positive initiatives that encourage values of kindness and generosity and awareness. Because there are lots of positive things happening in the world beyond the Buddhist Center as well. Yvonne was telling me about something this evening for refugees. So as a Sangha, it's good if we're aware of that, aware of these things, and where is possible, cooperate and encourage what's positive and life-enhancing in the world around us, where we can. But perhaps the very least we can do is at least just rejoice in what is well done, what's well done. Whether it's been done by, I don't know, a local politician or a business person or an artist or whoever. And being friendly amid the haters, I think, above all, it means not taking sides in any disputes, and where, especially like acrimonious disputes, and where possible, trying to calm troubled waters, even if possible, build bridges. Yeah. The next verse is a little more difficult to understand. It says it's exhorting us to be healthy among those who are sick. Yeah. Now, I suppose you could take this literally, because I think research has shown that those who are happy are generally healthier, yeah, and live longer than those who are not happy, yeah. And the Buddha does speak about, in one place he speaks about non-violence, which is not a way of talking about friendliness, as being beneficial to health, yeah. And he also, there's somewhere else where he talks about the 11 positive results of practicing metabhavana, practicing loving kindness, some of which would be very health-giving, yeah, such as sleeping well, yeah, or not having bad dreams, one of them is not being injured by weapons or poison. Good for your health. One of them is you have a serene complexion, yeah? And you won't be confused when death approaches. So all of those are quite good for that. However, we can also take this verse about being healthy among the sick in a more, poetic or symbolic way. There's a sutta called the Markandeya Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha meets a wanderer, a chap called Markandeya. And Markandeya does not like the Buddha. Yeah, he doesn't like him. He doesn't approve of him. But as part of their discussion, the Buddha recites a little verse, and then he explains it. So the verse is, he says, the greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best of paths, for it leads to the deathless. And then he goes on to explain what he means by sickness and health in that context. He talks about clinging to the 5 skandhas as the disease, and the cessation of clinging as health. So clinging to the 5 skandhas is another way of talking about clinging to a fixed self-view or clinging to ego, and being healthy among those who are sick then comes to mean being egoless among those who are egotistic, yeah? Or more simply even, being selfless among those who are selfish. Yeah? So this verse of the Dhammapada is about overcoming the delusion which binds us to selfishness, yeah, through fear and ignorance and so on. So being deeply happy and therefore being able to let go of self-centeredness becomes easier if we're able to realize on a deep level that we're constantly changing beings and that all around us are also constantly changing. So what that means is that we come to realize that trying to shore up our sense of insecurity by trying to fix things and control things will never work. Yeah. So by grasping or clinging on to a sense of self or to our possessions or to other people causes pain and suffering, because it's like trying to grasp, using a river in a different way. It's trying to grasp the water that's constantly flowing. You're never going to be able to grasp it. Now, if this might sound a bit abstract, but I've got a quote here from Bhante Sangharakshita, which I think gets to the heart of the matter in a more direct way. He says, a common misapprehension, this is from his book Living with Kindness, some people have read. A common misapprehension is to think of insight and egolessness in abstract or even metaphysical terms, rather than as comprising concretely lived attitudes and behaviour. But realising the truth of egolessness simply means being truly and deeply unselfish. to contemplate the principle of egolessness as some special principle that is somehow separate from our actual behaviour will leave it as far away as ever. If we find it difficult to realise the ultimate emptiness of self, the solution is to try to be a little less selfish. The understanding comes after the experience, not before. So I think that's a great, really down-to-earth way of talking about a very central Buddhist teaching. Yeah? And it's worth noting that most of us, probably all of us, have some experience of being selfless. Yeah. So it's not that we don't need to read something like that and think, oh dear, I'm nowhere or whatever. Most of us, or all of us, probably have some experience of being selfless on occasion, and so we're not completely, as it were, at sea when it comes to having some understanding of the truth of egolessness. It's simply that when we have that spontaneous impulse to unselfishness or to generosity, you could say, that's an expression of egolessness. Yeah? So we can work back from that expression, that experience, to having an even deeper understanding in time. But actually the experience, the lived experience, is more important than any conceptual understanding. So Bhante mentions in that quote, concretely lived attitudes and behaviours. So what are those concretely lived attitudes that lead to being healthy amid the sick, or egoless amid the egotistical? Well, the first thing actually is a concretely lived attitude and behaviour is to look after our health. It might seem very simple, but it's important to look after our physical health so that we can practice the Dharma and be of use to others. Yeah. It's there's another sutta in the Pali Canon where the Buddha says the first thing that enables someone to practice this Dharma is being free from illness and affliction, possessing a good digestion. Yeah. So, eating nourishing food, taking exercise, yeah, they're a part of our spiritual practice. And as well as helping ourselves, they can be a positive influence on others. Yeah. Then we could think about concretely lived attitudes. We need to think, well, what would be, as it were, bad attitudes, which we might call delusions, to use Buddhist language. What are unhealthy delusions, yeah, that we might be prone to? Because if we think, well, what kind of delusions might we have? That might enable us to see what it would be like to have healthy attitudes and behaviour. So I came up with some things just off the top of my head, as it were. Things that might be delusions that many of us hold. The delusion that we can have a perfect life. The delusion that anything will last forever. The delusion that material things bring satisfaction, or at least lasting satisfaction. The delusions that others are to blame, and we're the victims. Others are to blame for our dissatisfaction. The delusion that security is a matter of money and possessions. The delusion that we can control the future. The delusion that we know what other people are thinking, especially about us. the delusion that we're not dependent on others. So if we're to have concretely lived attitudes and behaviours that lead us to being happy indeed, healthy amid the sick, and we need to try and let go of our delusions. And there are probably many more than I've mentioned, and maybe I haven't mentioned your favourite delusion. You might have your own favourite one, which I leave to you to work out. Concretely lived attitudes, of course, come out in our relationships with other people. So we could consider how we might be more wise and less deluded in our relationships with others. We could ask, are we possessive in relation to partners or lovers? Do we allow them the freedom to live their own lives and be themselves, or are we trying to mould and change them to suit ourselves? Or in relation to parents, do we expect them to take responsibility for us and always be there for us? Or can we see them as individuals with their own needs and so on? In relation to children, do we feel that we own them? Or do we let them go at the appropriate time? Or in relation to friends, do we treat them as supports to lean on all the time, or do we also provide them with the warmth and the support they need? Or in relation to the wider Sangha, do we think in terms of what we can get for ourselves, or do we think about what we can contribute? Or even in relation to the local community or the country as a whole, do we expect to be provided for without having to contribute? And so on. So these are ways, this is just like questions, you probably come up with your own questions to try and look at where we might be in terms of our concretely lived attitudes and behaviour, where we might actually be giving expression to delusion rather than wisdom. Okay, so the third verse of the Dhammapada we're looking at is, happy indeed relate, content amid the greedy. And the word used here for greed is usaka, which has a sense of restless longing to it. It's sometimes translated as restlessness. It's the same word that's used in the hindrances to meditation, restlessness and anxiety, usaka. So it has this sense of restless longing to it. So contentment then has this sense of not being restless. So you could say contentment manifests in non-attachment, or more positively, it manifests in generosity or a sense of abundance even. And contentment expresses itself in living a simple life, with few possessions and taking joy in ordinary things, ordinary beauty. Contentment allows us to be generous and to think of others. And I think to develop contentment, one of the ways to develop contentment is to find enjoyment and satisfaction in simple things, in quite simple things. To find enjoyment, to find beauty and so on in quite simple things. Because often that's what we're looking for when we go for more complex things as well. We're looking for satisfaction, we're looking for enjoyment or pleasure or whatever. But you can find enjoyment in all sorts of things. Well, I'm sure you all do. the daffodils in the park, the leaves, the colours of the leaves, and the full moon tonight. Rain falling in puddles, or even a wrinkled face or a smile or whatever. You can find pleasure in all these things. Or you can even find pleasure in something that we all do all the time, something like walking. When you're walking down the street, it's actually, it's a little miracle, walking down the street. And we can find pleasure in the fact that we're able to do it. Yeah? And pleasure in just the contact with the earth and so on. Or pleasure in like the sound of voices or something. I was once in Barcelona. They had a Dharma class above a bookshop, and there was a little alleyway outside, and all the way through I was listening to a talk, and all the way through it I could hear all the sounds from the street, and actually somehow I found it really inspiring, the two together. There's somebody giving this Dharma talk, and all these sounds coming in. I wrote a poem about it afterwards. I was so inspired by it. So you can find enjoyment in all sorts of things, because that's maybe a good example, because you could equally be completely irritated and annoyed by the sounds in the street. You can also be enjoying it. And if we can relax into being present in the present, then we get even greater enjoyment from almost anything we do. Yeah, if we're present with it. So chatting with friends, or seeing a painting, or listening to the wind, or whatever. If we're really present with it, I'm sure you all know this. If you've been on retreats or whatever, you all know that this kind of different kind of pleasure that comes from being present and aware. And that's contentment, yeah. And contentment can be developed, you could say, cultivated by focusing on the positive in our lives and cultivating a sense of gratitude. A sense of gratitude for all we have, all that we have that is so fantastic in a way, if we pay attention to it. So some people reflect at the end of each day on everything they've enjoyed that day, everything that's given them pleasure and so on. And that's a really good practice, because it's one of those practices that has a cumulative effect. If you reflect on the things that give you pleasure, that you've enjoyed during the day, then you notice more. Like the next day, you notice things, and gradually over time, it's like that's what you see. You start to inhabit a world that is really enjoyable, because that's what you see. That's what you notice. Your mind is tuned into being grateful for the small things as well. Another aspect of contentment is having a bigger perspective in our lives. A bigger perspective on the events in our lives, the people we encounter, and so on. Maybe various ways of doing that. Meditation is one of those ways of getting a bigger perspective. Doing pujas and devotional practices away. One way that I've used in the past is just by thinking about vast space and vast time, and putting the things of my life into that context. And it really worked for me, because at the time I was working with being anxious. I had a lot of anxiety, and so the things I was anxious about, I would think of them in bigger and bigger periods of time, and I realised gradually that in 5 years or 10 years or certainly 50 years they wouldn't be that important, and similarly if you put them in a bigger arena of space. So if something's worrying you, in your life, in or in the Dublin Buddhist Centre, then that's just a small bit of the universe, isn't it? Yes. So having a bigger perspective, or even you could say creating a bigger perspective in our lives, using our minds to create a bigger perspective, can actually lead us to being more content. So it's contentment is in this verse is the opposite to greed, yeah, and it's the opposite to greed because it's there's the absence of that restless longing for more stimulation. Yeah, if you're really present and happy with what's happening, you're not longing for more stimulation, and generosity is a natural activity of contentment. I don't know if I need to explain that. It's like because contentment is not trying to hold on and cling to things, so it's naturally expansive, it's naturally open. And so generosity is a natural activity or expression of contentment. And acting generously can help to cultivate contentment, because it's like when you act generously, you do a bit of letting go. It might be literally letting go of a bit of money or something, but you're also letting go mentally. You're training yourself in letting go mentally, and of course, there's lots and lots of opportunities for generosity. Certainly around the Buddhist Centre, I'm sure there are lots of opportunities for generosity, giving money or helping out or whatever. People have all sorts of conditioning and emotions around giving, particularly about giving money. It's an area where there's a great deal of attachment and delusion, you could say. And it's an area where we experience, where we can learn a great deal about ourselves, I think, in relation to money, our attitudes to money. We can learn a great deal about ourselves, and we can learn about our deepest motivations. I remember doing quite a bit of work on that many years ago, just with other people in Sangha. We talked about money and our relationships to money over a period of time, and our attitudes to money and our conditioning around money, and where the attitudes come from. It's all very kind of revealing and helpful, because issues of security and identity and so on are often experienced in our attitudes to money. So it's to make spiritual progress, it's actually quite useful to do a kind of thorough exploration of your relationship to money. It can be very helpful. It can be especially helpful to do it in the context of this spiritual community with friends, people that you're close to. It's even worthwhile, I would say, getting together with some close friends, people that you trust, and talking about money. Just make it a thing. Yes, because it can be one of those taboo areas in our lives where there's lots of energy tied up. Yes, so there's lots of areas where we can be generous, in terms of whether it's in terms of the Buddhist Centre or the world at large. One kind of very topical area, I suppose, is the area of ecology and environment and so on. And I think ecological awareness is a matter of extending the meaning of the first precept. That precept about loving kindness or non-violence. to all aspects of our relationship with the world around us. Because what it can help us to do is to realise that we are really not separate from our environment. We're intimately bound up with it. It's not the case that we have humanity on one side and the natural environment on the other. We are an intrinsic part of the natural environment. So to practice loving kindness towards ourselves, we need to practice loving kindness towards the whole natural environment. Okay, so I've been talking about these three verses. Happy indeed we live, friendly amid the haters. Among those who hate, we dwell free from hatred. Happy indeed we live, healthy amid the sick. Among those who are sick, we dwell free from sickness. Happy indeed we live, content amid the greedy. Among those who are greedy, we dwell free from greed. And I've been talking about these as an expression of the Buddha's vision for the Sangha. So I said at the beginning that the Buddha's vision of the spiritual community was a vision of a community of people who work on themselves to develop positive mental states, to go beyond selfishness completely, a community of people who are willing to go out, as it were, into the world and share the Dharma with others, and for the welfare of the many, as the Buddha said, and a community of people who befriend and support each other in their endeavours. Yeah? So this is what the spiritual community is about in the Buddhist tradition, and also in the Triratna Buddhist community. So the Triratna Buddhist community is a community of people who want to grow in awareness and kindness, and a community of people who want to share that message of awareness and kindness with others, and a community of people who are willing to befriend and support each other in all of that. So, and we all know, and we're all probably already doing all the things you need in order to make all of that happen. You know, to grow in awareness and kindness, you need to meditate, go on retreat. Going on retreat is really important, actually, in all of this. It's probably, maybe it's the key thing in a way, going on retreat, because it takes you out of the world for a while to experience yourself more deeply, to experience what's possible in terms of better states of mind, higher states of consciousness, and that's what you bring back into the world. And if you keep doing that, gradually what you bring back is more and more of a positive influence. Yeah? Being ethical, of course, is part of this. You know, working on being more and more ethical. So the positive precepts, particularly the 10 precepts. I think if you're not an order member, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and practice the 10 precepts. Of course you should. And then, of course, reflecting on the Dharma and communicating with our friends. These are all part of the practices that create this kind of community. And we share the message of awareness and kindness, that message of the Dharma, by living it, basically. Sometimes perhaps by teaching it, but not everyone needs to teach it. You're sharing it by living it, or even by helping those who are able to live it and teach it more fully. Yeah, I won't burden you with that bit. So I'll finish off with this, that a spiritual community or a Sangha that's effective in all these ways will definitely have a positive effect on the world. That's just without question. It's like you could say it's a beacon of sanity in a deluded world, and we can be that community. We can be that Sangha at a local level and on a much larger scale, because of course, in terms of Triratna, the Dublin Buddhist Centre is part of something much, much larger. So we can integrate with the wider thing. Ñāṇadhāra knows all about the more worldwide aspect of it. So we've got a particular resource here in Ñāṇadhāra. Yes, and individually, of course, we're also like this, a beacon of Sangha if we keep going. I think that maybe I'll just finish off by saying that personally, having practiced like Sri C says it's over 40 years now, practicing the Dharma for over 40 years. And having struggled to practice, having had things to struggle with and all the rest of it, and experiencing the results of that practice, I can say that I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever about the effectiveness of practicing the Dharma and the positive influence it has on other people in the world around us. It's just so obvious, and so much of my experience, my actual lived experience as well, that I have no doubt about it. So I hope that's encouraging to you.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.